computer. Okay, Eilish, Marc, thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. Just really wanted to get a bit of conversation with yourselves about the board recruitment programme, how, Marc, you have found it from the Archery NI perspective, and Eilish yourself from the individual who has put themselves forward through the board recruitment programme and joined the programme, and coming from, I suppose, a strong sporting background, but wanting to step onto a board role. So I suppose, Marc, I'll start with yourself. How did Archery NI identify that they kind of either needed the support through their board recruitment programme or for the organisation?
Well, I suppose Archery NI is quite a small organisation and it's not a particularly large membership base. So I suppose immediately from that you're starting with a limitation in terms of the skills and competencies of people who'd be willing to come forwards to the board. So really, I was pushing for Archery NI to modernise, to ensure that we had a fit for purpose board, and really just to ensure that we could bring some relevant skills on. We had a number of gaps, and it was very clear that we were unable to fill those gaps through membership recruitment. So we looked very closely at the programme, we looked at the gaps we needed, and we identified one or two gaps and felt that the Sports Forum Board Recruitment Programme was the ideal way to source those skills from outside of our sport.
Okay, that's great. And how did you find integrating into the recruitment programme the stages of the Sports Forum being able to look at what your needs were, provide candidates, and then match up the candidates, and then I suppose engage with ultimately with Eilish then in the end up?
So fortunately, as a starting point, we already have a sort of governing document that allows independent board members recruited, and it's not specific that it has to be an open recruitment process per se. So we were already pretty well set from that perspective. So the process that we use with you in terms of sort of looking at the available candidates, matching, in terms of who was appropriate to come into an organisation of our size with our challenge, and going through it initially in a reasonably informal introduction manner worked quite well for us before we then went through the more formal steps of Eilish sitting with another board member in addition to myself. So it worked, it was quite smooth and it worked quite well.
Okay, that's good. And I suppose moving on from there, then thankfully Eilish has joined the board and all progressed well. And how beneficial has it been having that independent person coming on board, fresh perspective on archery, and as well as that kind of giving in an independent view and having skills that ultimately strengthen the board?
Yeah, I think it's beneficial now. As Eilish would probably back up, initial board members that she was involved in were very archery orientated, and the board were very quick and still are at times to really want to talk in the comfort zone about the archery aspect as opposed to looking at the business side. So I think it's actually strengthened me as an independent non-archer on the board to have someone else in a similar situation that's able to keep the board moving in the right direction and talking about relevant areas. It's also very clear, that Eilish is bringing other skills and other experiences from, our day job and from our involvement in other sports, which is always welcome because there's so much you can always take in from other sports and start to implement in your own sport. And we also had a very, really benefit, it was very beneficial to have Eilish when we had a complaints process to go through, which necessitated someone entirely independent from the sport. So to be able to draw that independence from the sport of any perceived conflict of interest from your own board is pretty priceless.
Okay, so from your feedback there, it sounds as if it's been very beneficial, for yourselves, for your board to be able to look at various things. I would be hoping then that you would be recommending the process, or sports and organisations, our members, to engage in the process to find people to join their board. We have a large pool of people who are willing to put themselves forward, and we're waiting for organisations really to grasp the opportunity and get those skills and independent people that they need.
Look, I would say sports very much sometimes have a fear of looking outside of their own sports. There's a suspicion of people from outside the sports, but I think there's also a feeling of why would someone who's not from the sport, not passionate about the sport, all of these things, want to give up their time to help our sport? A lot of sports have that sort of complex. Nobody would want to come and volunteer their time for us. As I said at the outset, Archery NI is a small organisation. It's probably not up there as the most glamorous of sports, certainly not the most high profile of sports. And whilst I'm sure what can be offered by the Irish Football Association or GAA in terms of sitting on the board versus what can be offered by Archery NI are completely different. But there's a lot of benefits both to the candidate and to the sport. And if Archery NI can attract someone, I'm sure any sport can attract and facilitate.
That's great to hear. So Eilish, we'll go over to yourself. I suppose the first question is why did you express an interest in joining a board in the initial? Like you're maybe somebody who is still in a playing career within sport, busy working within sport, and could have said I'll wait to do this down the line. But what was the attraction to do this for yourself?
Yeah, I suppose there are kind of a number of attractions for me. Like as you kind of touched upon, I still play sport quite actively myself. My day-to-day job, I work with British Gymnastics, and then I also do some other work with other governing bodies. So it wasn't as if I didn't have enough kind of interest at the moment. But I think for me, I suppose working as part of a board was something like I identified that I wanted to do as part of my own personal development. And I do have like a really strong passion and interest for sports development, and over the past kind of couple of years particularly, that's kind of grown into the governance of sport. And I felt that actually working as part of a board would be something that would really benefit not only me, but it was something that I could really bring some benefit to the organisation as well that I'd be working with, in terms of not only my expertise but also kind of that passion for wanting to develop sport on the whole. So I suppose from the program perspective, it was something I kind of been considering getting involved with in terms of like getting involved in a board for a number of months previously. And it was just kind of really good timing with that regard. I obviously seen the program being advertised through the sports forum, and, I just put together the application, and I think it kind of reduced a lot of the admin as such on my end. I think Marc's touched upon it already, but like having, say, for example, like actually knowing where to find, how to get on to like any governing body board or any, say, club board or anything like that can be quite a time intensive process, or, it's not like I wouldn't necessarily know where to look. Whereas with this process, it was actually quite easy in the sense of I just completed my application and then it was kind of over to you to match us up as such. So I suppose that's why, I was kind of interested in the board representation, but then also the program specifically itself.
Yeah, okay, that sounds great. I mean, it's really, really good to hear that. The personal development aspect is something you really identify. Yeah. So looking into, I suppose, the next step of how you progressed on, once you were matched up with Archery NI, and how that discussion, how did you find that initial engagement? Because it can be quite daunting to sit down with an organisation that you maybe don't know much about, and get that conversation started in an informal setting before kind of joining the board. So how did you find that whole process?
Yeah, like for me, the process, as you kind of said, it was it can be quite formal, but I actually felt it was quite relaxed in the outset. Even from, I think Marc rang me whenever you kind of matched us up as such, and we had quite like an informal conversation. I think I was actually on holidays at the time, so maybe wasn't too grateful of that part, but we had a meeting, myself and Marc and Kim, who's the secretary for Archery NI, and it was very much just, we had an informal conversation regarding what they wanted from the role, but then also what I felt I could bring to the role and my kind of expertise within that. And from there, I kind of met some of the other board members in a more informal setting and kind of had similar conversations with them to kind of tease out, I suppose, what they felt, you know, the board needed, but also kind of just to gain a better understanding of who I was. So from that aspect, for me, it was quite, you know, the whole process up until, I suppose, me actually being co-opted onto the board was quite an informal one, and was quite a relaxed process for that. I know that the other members of the board obviously had to discuss then in a formal setting, you know, of a board meetings, like whether or not they wanted me to be co-opted on. But you know, for me, the process was quite relaxed in that regard, and was quite reassuring that it wasn't, you know, I think sometimes there can be a bit of misconception around, you know, boards and the kind of formal nature of them, and obviously you have to go through all the legal processes and things like that. But for me, it was, you know, it was quite an easy process to go through, and kind of from those kind of conversations then going into the induction process and getting those kind of formal governing documents and different things, you know, it was quite, I find it quite seamless anyway.
That's great. So you're a number of months in. Yeah. So how, personally yourself, how have you, you know, how have you found, you know, being on a board, and how it's maybe helped you personally through your own role, or kind of, you know, has it met your expectations of, you know, you're doing something to try and give back or to sport as well as learn, you know, so it's a two-way street. So kind of how have you found that, you know, being able to juggle that all together?
Yeah, like I think I suppose similar for, like, obviously going onto a board in itself is quite a learning curve, but and can be quite a challenge. And I think the additional aspect is, like yourself and Mark have already touched upon, of not knowing the technical nature of the sport, can be, you know, can be something that you need to get to grips with. But I think that kind of not understanding necessarily all the technical aspects of the sport was something I was quite familiar with when working in gymnastics already. So for me, like, it's been really enjoyable. It has been a challenge, as I said, and I think that learning curve in terms of obviously getting to grips with another sport, but personally, like, I got to learn a lot about, you know, the operation of governance, and, you know, how that works and more of a practical aspect. And I think, you know, as Mark's touched upon already, archery within Northern Ireland, you know, there is quite a small membership base, and in terms of the governing body, there's no necessarily no paid workforce as such. So, you know, as a board, I think we're probably a bit more operational minded compared to, you know, other organizations that obviously do have that workforce in the ground. But for me, being able to get you know, more experience in terms of the strategic element of things, and starting, you know, we've put together the strategy document over the past number of months, and actually getting to work on those kind of, you know, processes and projects in a more like autonomous environment has been really beneficial for me, you know, and it's been, overall, it's been a real learning curve in terms of everything. So, like, I've really enjoyed it, you know, and getting that challenge kind of outside of my comfort zone has been great.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. So I would be hoping then you would say you would recommend it to, you know, one, the process to other people, and getting on a board, I suppose, for an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I found, like I say, I found the process particularly really beneficial, just because it removes, or for me anyway, it removed a lot of, you know, the barriers as such, because you're kind of doing that match-up process. So, like, the sports forum really acted as that filter for me, which was really, really useful, and kind of saved me a lot of time, I think, you know, in trying to resource that myself. And yeah, I think, you know, the whole process, like, I would definitely recommend, like, I just think you obviously need to know, I suppose, identify like what you can bring to the, you know, any potential board, and also what you want from the experience. And I think that was kind of critical, making sure, like, we both hopefully found a good match, like me in terms of the board and the board in terms of me. So but yeah, I definitely recommend the whole process and experience.
That's great. And so, Mark, I suppose just back to yourself. Obviously, you know, you've had a long experience in sports development, and through governance particularly, and now within your own day job as well with Ulster Hockey. I suppose from yourself, have you kind of noticed then the difference over the period of time, from archery, of looking at that comparison of the operational to the strategic view?
Yeah, I think Sort of on a wider notice, you know, a wider, I think sport in general across Northern Ireland is becoming more strategic, and boards are moving towards strategic. Now, for a board like Archery NI, unfortunately, as the Eilish touched on, there's no staff members. So it has to be fairly operational, particularly as we don't really have a wealth of committee volunteers either at this point, which is something we're looking to change. But certainly the way the board is approaching its discussions and the way, you know, we're trying to operate is becoming more strategic, and there is a better strategy to work against. In terms of my day job, it's very much the same. There's a wide restructure going on there with a view to the board moving away from its fairly operational function at the moment. So I think that's a trend which is happening across sports, and I do believe that that is driven even better, you know, when you have independence on the board. It facilitates that more strategic, because at the end of the day, I'm very much the same as Eilish. I don't get the technicalities of archery, so I can't sit and talk a lot about archery. You know, it's completely outside my comfort zone. So, you know, having people that don't understand the sport, that don't get, I suppose, caught up in the emotion, the relationships, the history, who fell out with who in 1975, all that stuff. It's just good to have, you know, those people in a sport, because they keep that strategic direction very much at the centre of the board's operation.
Okay. Well, that's certainly a good overview of the way that boards can work, and we know that from experience. But listen, I just want to thank the two of you for giving your time. One to archery, from an outside of the sport perspective. Certainly, it's good to see the development of the organisation, and two, then for your time this afternoon. And hopefully, this will encourage more of our member organisations to get involved in the programme, regardless of the size that they are. So, thanks very much. Keep up the good work, and I'll chat to you soon.
No worries.
Thanks a lot, Ciaran.